Have you ever had the situation where you're in your Salesforce instance and you needed to open up a piece of Apex code, say a class, and you just weren't quite sure what everything that you were looking at meant, because it's code, it's not English, and sometimes it's if we don't work with it every day, it can seem unusual. And maybe even worse, you actually encountered a situation where you've got a problem, something, an error is thrown in your system, and you know where the error is coming from. So when you open up the code, you know that you need to make a change in there somewhere, but you're not quite sure, like, if you're going to break something or what might happen if you make some modifications. So that's what we're going to cover in today's topic. It's all about Apex syntax. Now, we're not going to go cover the whole topic because that would be enough material for a full course. So we'll just cover some of the basics and some of the things that will get you through in your day-to-day job. I've worked with developers from all different levels and backgrounds, and I'll tell you, everyone at one point or another gets hung up on some of the finer details in Apex syntax. But once you learn the basics, it's going to solve a whole class of problems for you, because you'll be able to get your footing as soon as you open up an Apex class and start poking around. If you are interested in taking steps to shift your career from, say, Salesforce admin to Apex developer, I invite you to take my free assessment, which is how ready are you to make the jump into Apex development. You can see the link here on the screen and check it out. It's free, and it will help you see areas that you're already comfortable in and maybe some areas that you might need to work on, and give you a plan for how to develop those skills that you need. So let's look at some code. So here I have a simple class that I'm just using for illustration purposes. And we can see a couple of the things that are already here in an Apex syntax. We'll start with, we've got these curly braces. You'll see these a lot. They're going to be in any class that you have. But what the curly braces do is they basically scope other blocks of code. So for instance, here we've got a class, and I'll get into these keywords in a little bit. We've got a public class simply called sample functions, and then these two curly braces here at the beginning and here at the end are the scope of the class. So anything in between these two are the class. Similarly, here in the class we have what look like functions. This one is a constructor, and this one is a method, or some people call them functions. And each of these has a set of curly braces, and these curly braces are where we will put in the code that is relevant to either of these functions. And so that's what curly braces do. Curly braces are for scoping. We will see them in different contexts because they're not just for functions. Another thing that we'll see a lot of is parentheses, and we can see both of these functions have parentheses at just an empty set of parentheses. A key thing when you're in a class and you're defining your pieces is that the parentheses show that this is a function, and if those were missing, that this might be a variable. So for example, let me add a variable to this class. So here we have a string, and the string, we're simply calling it name, and I've added my name in as the initializer. So some syntax things to point out here. First off is semicolons. Semicolons are a really important part of Apex syntax. They are what always end a line of functionality. Now, it's possible that we could spread this out over multiple lines, actual lines, but the meaning is the same, because the semicolon is what tells the compiler, you know, we're done with a piece of functionality. So here, this piece of functionality is a declaration of a string called name. And again, what I'm pointing out is that this, since there are no parentheses around this, we know it's not a function. If this were a function, we would have it similar to this with parentheses. So I'm going to move that inside this function. So that we could work with it here. Now, another thing that you're going to see a lot of is what I'll call dot notation. And when you look at Apex is an object-oriented language, so often what we're dealing with are objects. Now, I'm going to have another video to dive into what that actually means. But for now, if you've heard of object-oriented programming, it'll probably make sense what I just said. And if not, don't worry. The important thing to think about is when we're working with something, it's an object, and objects have fields, and objects have methods, aka functions, and we access either of those using the dot notation. So here I took the name. So here is how we initialize an object. We've got a string that tells us the type of the object. The name is simply a name we gave it. I could call this foo. It doesn't matter what I call it there. And then this is how we just initialize it with some data. Initializing is optional. We could always do that later in the code, but it's often convenient to do it in a single line. And we end it with the semicolon. Here we take that object name, and I know that it has a function on it called toLowerCase, and we can call that. And when I call that, I use the parentheses to show, yes, this is a function I'm calling. I'm not just accessing a member. So here, when we call name toLowerCase, it doesn't really do anything. You might think it actually lowercases this. What it does is it creates a new string and returns it. So let me declare a new string here. So here, what we're doing is we're taking the name object, calling toLowerCase, and it's going to return a lowercase version of it, and we store it in a new variable that we've created. So we have a new variable, string lower version. The equal sign in this case is an assignment. It takes what we have on the right-hand side and assigns it to this object we've created on the left-hand side. Similar to here, the lowercase version is going to look in lower, and we can see this in action if we do some debug statements. So again, we're going to get to look at some of the syntax involved. So here I'm calling an object that's called system, and I know it has a method called debug, and that'll just print things out to the screen. And I'm going to print out the name. End my line. So to run this, I'm going to actually use some execute anonymous. And so first I need an instance of my object. So this is how we instantiate an object. Similar to doing string and then a name, string lower version, we have sample functions because this is now a type that we've declared. And again, we give it a name. This could have been anything, almost anything. And we assign it, this call here, new sample functions, is a call to the constructor, which our constructor doesn't do anything. So it simply creates this object in memory and doesn't do any logic. From here, we can use the dot notation, sf dot, and then we can tell it that we want to call this function, string manipulation. And we do that, and it's going to go through these 4 lines, and 2 of them are gonna give us some debug output. So let's see what goes on there. So we can see the first line just printed it out as it was, and the second line was our lowercase version. So that's what we were expecting. One last thing I want to talk about is keywords. You'll notice there are some words here that, you know, we may not know what they mean, but we've got public and class and void. The Dev Console puts these in different colors, which kind of tells us there is some special meaning around them. And these are our keywords. There's lots of keywords in Apex, and each one has their own meaning. But the important thing to know is if you've got a keyword, you cannot use that for a variable name. For instance, I said, you know, this name could be anything, but if I call it void and I hit save, down here in the problems window, it's going to give us a little error. Identifier name is reserved, void. So we cannot use void or string or public. Yep, we're going to get that same error, unexpected token public. So it's just, it's a slightly different error message, but the idea is there are certain things we can't use for variable names because they are reserved by the language, and that's true of any language. You know, lots of languages have keywords. So, all right, I think we'll end right there. There's lots more I could dig into, and I'll probably actually turn this into a series because there is a lot more than we can squeeze into a short video. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to leave comments if anything that I said here needs some clarification, or if you're coming across some code and you're not sure, you know, what it's doing or what it means, feel free to, ask in the comments and we can address it. One thing you could do to practice with this today is if you've got access to your Salesforce instance, hopefully a sandbox or a developer org or maybe a Trailhead org, go in, find a class, open it up, and look at, you know, some of these things like that we've got here, like use our dot notation. And I encourage people to do, this might sound funny, but I encourage people to go in and break it. Make a change, like if I remove that dot and save it, what happens? And you can see it's, it doesn't know what to do with name to lowercase. It just, we threw it off because we removed the dot, and then we can add it back in and save it. It might seem funny, but going in and kind of breaking things and seeing what the compiler tells us and then fixing it, it's a good way to kind of educate yourself on what something does. And if you're doing it in a sandbox, it's a safe environment. You're not going to break anything. You're not going to hurt anything. And if you make enough changes and you've got errors all over the place and you don't remember and you can't get back, just remember undo is your friend. Control Z will take back, if I remove that dot, if I hit Control Z or Command Z on Mac platforms, it'll bring you back, and you can just keep doing that back till everything's clean again. So like I said, we'll expand on this more in a future video, but in the meantime, if you want to see a simple example of how to implement a trigger, you can take this video right here where we talk about a simple approach to implementing your first trigger. I will see you next time.